Everybody has those blocks, those walls. Some of those are difficult to surpass, but there's ways to break those walls and there's ways through them. We just have to find them.
Mention the name Shinzo Ohki to anyone who lived in Columbia City between the 1920s and 1960s, and smiles and fond memories will soon follow. Shinzo Ohki, a Japanese immigrant, was the driving force for a small rural Indiana community to break the barrier of animosity during a time period of Asian racism. By fully immersing himself into the community, including starting a thriving business and joining the Columbia City Rotary Club, he helped people overcome their biased attitudes towards Japanese Americans, even during the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. Still to this day, Columbia City takes great pride in their past friend and community member Shinzo Ohki, looking for ways to extend his ideals and strive to show open-mindedness and acceptance.
This then is the tale of how a boy from far-off Japan came to be part of a little well-known Hoosier community in Middle West America.
Shinzo Ohki immigrated to America from his home country of Japan in the year 1900. Arriving along the West Coast at 13 years old, young Ohki worked off his passage for Mr. and Mrs. Diston, originally Columbia City residents, as a houseboy in Seattle and later Alaska. Eventually, they returned to Indiana.
Ohki was one of the only Japanese boys at the time to make this remote community his home. After graduating in 1907 from Columbia City Joint High School, Mr. Ohki continued his studies in New York, earning a degree in business administration. After his studies, he traveled back to Japan, where he married Taka Iwanga, the girl next door, in 1917, and returned to Whitley County, Indiana, to establish a home.
To further his involvement in the community, he became a member of the Columbia City Rotary Club. This club focuses on community service, and by joining, Mr. Ohki hoped to give back to a community that had accepted him so graciously.
The Rotary Foundation's mission is to promote peace, goodwill, and understanding among the peoples of the earth.
Shinzo Ohki came to live by these principles and carried them with him throughout the establishment of his soy sauce factory.
Many communities in the United States were hesitant to accept immigrants into their cultures by implementing immigration restrictions like the Chinese Exclusion Act. However, Shinzo Ohki was able to thrive. Mr. Ohki established his Shoyu soy sauce company and built his first factory in the community he now called home.
Gaining traction in the area and soon across the country, Mr. Ohki's fermented soy sauce was a huge success. Washington, D.C.'s Evening Star newspapers advertised the small-town factory's products. With the help of Mr. Ohki, chop suey became a popular dish across America because of his catering events and recipe books. While Mr. Ohki was assimilating well into his American community, the tensions amongst the United States and the Axis powers continued to grow.
December 7th, 1941. The Japanese launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, introducing the United States into World War II. In hopes of putting the American population at ease, President Franklin D. Roosevelt released Executive Order 9066. Japanese residents would be relocated to internment camps. Fear was instilled in the American population, afraid of espionage, afraid of terrorism, afraid of death. So they put up walls, exiled them, and locked them away.
Americans had turned their backs on their Asian American neighbors. Indiana University Bloomington started to take their own actions by denying admission to Japanese students between 1942 and 1945. Cherry blossom trees, symbolic to Japan, were intentionally cut down throughout Indiana and other states. American soldiers stole the swords off the backs of Japanese generals during the height of the war. Very few Japanese Americans felt that they had a voice.
But Shinzo Ohki remained in Columbia City, and he was very ashamed of Japan's brutal attack on the United States. He understood his association with Japan, and he feared he would be an outsider to a community he called home.
He had 2 boys in the neighborhood who would do his gardening, and they came early in the springtime, and he said, "You can't work for me anymore," and he gave them each $5, which was huge. And he told them to go home and ask their parents to explain it to him. And the children said their parents told them that it was because he was Japanese and he didn't want anyone to have that associated with them and hurt them in any way.
The people of Whitley County had already given Mr. Ohki the opportunity to showcase who he was. He revealed himself as a community benefactor, a Christian gentleman, a talented artist, a successful industrialist, and an accomplished Rotarian. But because of the new reputation Japan had established with the United States, Shinzo Ohki decided it would be appropriate to distance himself from his new life and his new friends out of embarrassment, but the community thought otherwise.
Well, he didn't want any aspersion cast on that good group because he was Japanese. They got up from their meeting, went to his house and said, "You are an American. Come to this meeting with us." And he did.
Columbia City Rotary members collected signatures for a letter vouching for Mr. Ohki's character. Many citizens wrote letters to congressmen, while the Columbia City Rotary Club bought an advertisement in a Whitley County newspaper to praise Mr. Ohki's character.
The letter authors described Shinzo Ohki as an honorable gentleman whose loyalty to the welfare of the community and nation has gained for him the respect and confidence of all the citizens who have had the privilege of a close acquaintance with him. While the Japanese in America were sent to internment camps, members of Mr. Ohki's church took turns staying with him and his family to provide peace of mind and protection.
With the overwhelming support from his community, Shinzo Ohki found comfort in connecting with and establishing relationships within Whitley County again. No longer scared for his livelihood and possessions, Mr. Ohki decided to contribute his resources and positive mindset back to his community and others.
When the war was over and the soldiers came home, it didn't matter if they had fought on the European front or on the Pacific front. He gave them jobs. And if he found out that those who had been on the Pacific front had swords that they had collected from the bodies of Japanese soldiers, he explained to them the importance of these swords to the Japanese families, and the men gave him the swords, and he took these swords back to Japan and got them back to the families.
After the war tensions began to fade, Shinzo Ohki indulged much of his free time in community involvement. He continued many of his hobbies, which included painting and gardening. He even established the Crooked Lake Golf Course, which still operates and retains some of Mr. Ohki's original landscaping. By utilizing his many talents, he was able to give back to the community through charity and local events.
The horrors of Pearl Harbor and the brutal Pacific battles of World War II created hatred against Japan and a motive for Americans to discriminate against Japanese Americans.
However, Shinzo Ohki was the driving force for a small community to break this barrier of animosity.
He assimilated himself into an unfamiliar culture by joining the Rotary Club, where he implemented its principles into his own soy sauce business and created a legacy.
Shinzo Ohki's impact on the community is a lesson communities should still use today.
Don't look at people and judge them because you don't know the content of their heart and their character. If they don't happen to look like us, so be it. Who are they?
Shinzo Ohki's story continues to inspire people to be more open-minded and accepting despite the barrier of animosity brought by differences between countries around the world. Although Shinzo Ohki was not born in Columbia City, the community accepted him for who he was, not where he came from.